It's easy to underestimate people. Easy to look at a quiet man and assume he's harmless, that he can't fight back. But sometimes, the ones we think are weakest are the ones the world should fear the most. A local gang tried to attack a simple black mechanic, but what they didn't know was that some shadows never really die. Before I continue, please subscribe and comment where you're watching from, so this story can reach more people. Now, let's begin. The wrench slipped from Khalil Freeman's hand, clattering against the concrete floor of his garage. Blood dripped from his split lip, mixing with the black engine oil pooling beneath him. His vision blurred as a steel-toed boot stopped inches from his face. "Should have paid up when you had the chance, old man," a voice sneered from above. Khalil didn't respond. He couldn't. His ribs screamed with every shallow breath, and the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. Through the haze of pain, his eyes caught something, a glimpse of the tattoo on his forearm, partially visible beneath his torn sleeve. A single word in Arabic script. Shadow. His fingers twitched. Not again, he thought. But this time would be different. Before that night, Khalil Freeman was just another face in the neighborhood. His auto shop sat on the corner of Fairview and 8th, wedged between a laundromat and a corner store that had been there since the 72nds. The sign above the garage door read Freeman's Auto Repair in faded letters, and most days you could hear the hum of an engine or the clang of tools echoing from inside. Khalil was the kind of man people trusted. Quiet, steady, never raised his voice, never turned anyone away. Mrs. Chen brought her rusted Honda every month, even though Khalil knew she couldn't afford the repairs. He'd fix it anyway, waving off her attempts to pay. "It's just a loose belt, Mrs. Chen," he'd say with a faint smile. "No charge." The neighborhood kids would ride their bikes past the shop, and Khalil would wave, grease-stained hands, always busy under the hood of some vehicle. He'd been in the area for 5 years, but no one really knew much about him. He kept to himself. Worked alone. Never talked about where he came from. Some people thought he was running from something. Others figured he'd lost someone and needed the solitude. The truth, as it often is, was more complicated than anyone could have guessed. Khalil had routines. He opened the shop at 7 every morning, closed at 6 every evening. He ate lunch at the same diner, 3 blocks away, always the corner booth, always facing the door. He read the newspaper with his coffee, kept his phone on silent, and paid in cash. But people noticed things, like how his hands moved too fast when diagnosing an engine, precision that came from years of training, not just experience. Or how he always seemed to know when trouble was coming, his eyes flicking toward the street seconds before a fight broke out or a car backfired. Or how, one time, when a drunk driver nearly plowed into a group of teenagers outside the shop, Khalil moved like lightning, pulling 3 kids out of the way in a blur of motion that left bystanders stunned. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" someone had asked. Khalil just shrugged. Reflex. But his old friend Ray, a retired Army Ranger who stopped by occasionally, knew better. Once, Ray had called him Sarge by mistake, and Khalil's jaw had tightened instantly. "Don't call me that," Khalil had muttered, his voice low and sharp. Ray had nodded, understanding. Whatever Khalil had been before, he wasn't that man anymore. At least, that's what Khalil wanted to believe. The shop itself was modest but clean. 2 hydraulic lifts, a workbench covered in organized tools, shelves stocked with parts. Everything had its place. Khalil ran the business honestly, no overcharging, no cutting corners. He took pride in his work, in the simplicity of fixing what was broken. It was a quiet life, a peaceful life. But peace, Khalil had learned long ago, was a fragile thing. It started small. A broken window, spray paint on the garage door, trash dumped in front of the shop entrance. At first, Khalil cleaned it up without complaint. He replaced the window himself, painted over the graffiti, swept away the trash. He didn't report it to the police. He didn't ask questions. But the incidents didn't stop. Then came the visits. 3 men, early 20s, tattoos crawling up their necks. They called themselves the Fairview Crew, though everyone knew they were just neighborhood thugs who extorted local businesses for protection money. Their leader was a man named Dominic Kane, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his left cheek. He walked like he owned the block, and in a way, he did. Anyone who didn't pay up found their shops vandalized, their cars torched, or worse. Dominic had built his reputation on intimidation. He wasn't the smartest, but he was ruthless. He'd grown up on these streets, clawed his way to the top through violence and fear. To him, people like Khalil were easy targets, quiet, isolated, vulnerable. The first time they showed up at Khalil's garage, Dominic leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. "Nice little shop you got here," Dominic said, his tone casual but laced with threat. "Be a shame if something happened to it." Khalil didn't look up from the engine he was working on. "I'm not interested." Dominic's smirk widened. "Not interested? You hear that, boys? Man thinks he's got a choice." The other two laughed, their eyes cold and predatory. "Everyone pays, old man," Dominic continued, stepping closer. "500 a month. Keeps your shop safe. Keeps you safe." Khalil finally looked up, his gaze steady and unreadable. "I said no." For a moment, Dominic's smirk faltered. There was something in Khalil's eyes, something that made him hesitate. But the moment passed, and Dominic's expression hardened. "You'll regret that," he said, turning to leave, "real soon." Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. They slashed tires on cars parked near the shop, smashed headlights, spray-painted threats on the walls, "Pay up, or else." Khalil stayed calm. He cleaned up the mess, fixed the damage, kept working. But inside, the old instincts were waking up. The part of him he'd buried was stirring, whispering that this wouldn't end peacefully. That men like Dominic only understood one language. People in the neighborhood started to worry. "Khalil, you gotta call the cops," Mrs. Chen said one afternoon, her voice trembling. "These men, they're dangerous." Khalil just shook his head. "I can handle it." "But they'll hurt you," she insisted. Khalil gave her a faint, sad smile. "I've been hurt before." Ray came by later that week, his expression grim. "I heard about the Fairview crew," he said, leaning against the workbench. "You want me to make some calls? I know people." Khalil shook his head. "I appreciate it, Ray. But this is my problem." Ray studied him for a long moment. "You sure about that? Because the man I knew, the one who led Shadow Company, he wouldn't have let this slide." Khalil's jaw tightened. "That man's gone." "Is he?" Ray asked quietly. Khalil didn't answer. They came on a Friday night. The shop was empty, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. Khalil was finishing up on a sedan, his hands covered in grease, when he heard the footsteps. 5 of them this time. Dominic and his crew, plus 2 more. Khalil straightened, his heart rate steady, despite the adrenaline beginning to surge through his veins. He'd known this was coming. He'd felt it in the air, the way predators circle before they strike. "Last chance, old man," Dominic said, stepping into the garage. His voice was louder now, more confident. He had backup. He had numbers. "Pay up, or we burn this place to the ground." Khalil wiped his hands on a rag, his movement slow and deliberate. "I'm not paying you anything." Dominic's face twisted with rage. "Then you're done." It happened fast. One of the men swung a crowbar, catching Khalil in the ribs. Pain exploded through his chest, white-hot and searing. He staggered, but didn't fall. Another blow landed on his back, driving him to one knee. They laughed as they beat him, kicking, stomping, smashing tools over his head. Khalil curled into himself, shielding his face as best he could. Blood flowed freely now, mixing with the oil and grease on the garage floor. "Look at him," one of them sneered. "Thought he was tough." Dominic crouched beside Khalil, grabbing a fistful of his hair and forcing his head up. Khalil's vision swam, but he could see the cruel satisfaction in Dominic's eyes. "You should have listened," Dominic said, his breath hot and sour. "Now you're gonna lose everything." Through the haze of pain, Khalil's gaze drifted to his forearm. The tattoo was visible now, torn fabric exposing the Arabic script, "Shadow." And in that moment, something inside him snapped. Not with rage, not with fear, with clarity. He'd tried to run from who he was, tried to bury the soldier, the operator, the killer. But you can't outrun your nature. You can only choose when to let it surface. And tonight, Khalil Freeman made his choice. Khalil Freeman wasn't always a mechanic. 15 years ago, he was Captain Khalil Freeman, leader of Shadow Company, an elite Black Ops unit that operated in the darkest corners of the world. Hostage rescues, assassination missions, covert infiltrations. Places that didn't officially exist, doing things that were never reported. Shadow Company didn't follow normal military protocol. They were ghosts, invisible, lethal, efficient. They operated outside the chain of command, answering only to a classified division within the Pentagon. Khalil had been recruited at 23, fresh out of the Rangers. He'd shown an aptitude for strategy, for reading situations others couldn't. He could predict enemy movements, adapt on the fly, stay calm under fire. By 28, he was leading Shadow Company. By 30, he'd completed over 50 missions across 4 continents. He'd been the best, ruthless when necessary, compassionate when possible, but always effective. But the work had taken its toll. Every mission left scars, some visible, some not. He'd seen things no man should see, done things he couldn't take back. Colleagues had died, innocents had been caught in the crossfire. And with each mission, a piece of Khalil's humanity had eroded. The breaking point came on a mission in Yemen. A high-value target, a compound. Intelligence said civilians had been evacuated. Intelligence was wrong. When the smoke cleared, 3 children lay dead in the rubble. Collateral damage, the report would later say. Acceptable losses, but not to Khalil. He'd carried one of the bodies out himself, a girl no older than 6, her small hand still clutching a doll. He'd looked into her lifeless eyes and seen his own soul staring back. Empty, hollow, lost. 2 weeks later, Khalil Freeman resigned, disappeared. The military tried to pull him back, but he refused. He changed his name, moved across the country, and buried Captain Freeman as deep as he could. He'd promised himself he'd never go back, never become that man again. But as he lay on the cold garage floor, blood dripping from his face, he realized something. Sometimes, you don't get to choose who you are. Sometimes, the world makes that choice for you. And tonight, the world needed the shadow. They left him there, laughing as they walked out into the night. Khalil didn't move for a long time. He lay there, listening to the sound of their voices fade, the pain radiating through every inch of his body. His ribs were cracked, maybe broken. His face was swollen, blood crusting around his eyes and mouth. But his mind was clear. Slowly, methodically, he pushed himself up. His hands trembled, but he forced them steady. He staggered to the sink, turning on the cold water and letting it run over his face. The blood washed away, revealing the bruises beneath. His reflection stared back at him, older, scarred, tired. But the eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, lethal. Khalil limped to the back of the shop, where a steel cabinet sat against the wall. It was locked, with a combination only he knew. He opened it, revealing a duffel bag covered in dust. He unzipped it slowly, reverently. Inside were the tools of his former life. A tactical knife with a carbon fiber handle, a compact Glock 19 with 2 spare magazines, a set of lock picks, flex cuffs, night vision monocular, a small toolkit designed for sabotage wire cutters, pliers, a mini blowtorch. He pulled out the knife first, turning it over in his hands. The weight felt familiar, comforting. He tested the edge still sharp after all these years. Next came the Glock. He field stripped it, checked the action, reassembled it. Muscle memory took over, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He loaded a magazine, chambered a round, and set the weapon on the workbench. Then he sat down, closing his eyes and letting his breathing slow. He needed to center himself, to transition from Khalil, the mechanic, to Captain Freeman, the operator. It took 20 minutes. When he opened his eyes again, the transformation was complete. He zipped the bag back up and slung it over his shoulder. The mechanic was gone. The shadow had returned. Khalil didn't rush. He never did. Rushing led to mistakes. Mistakes led to failure. And failure, in his world, meant death. He started with reconnaissance. Dominic and his crew operated out of an abandoned warehouse on the east side of town. Khalil had known this for weeks. He'd been watching them since the first time they'd shown up at his shop. He knew their routines, knew where they drank, knew where they lived, knew their vehicles, their girlfriends, their favorite spots to hang out. Shadow Company had taught him one fundamental truth: information is the ultimate weapon. He started with their vehicles, each one parked outside Manny's bar, the crew's usual hangout. It was almost too easy. Khalil moved through the shadows like smoke, invisible to the drunks stumbling in and out of the bar. A cut fuel line here, a loosened brake line there. sugar in a gas tank. By morning, 3 of their cars would be undrivable, dangerous, even. But that was just the opening move. Next, he tracked individual crew members. The youngest one, a kid named Tommy, lived alone in a rundown apartment 2 miles from the warehouse. Khalil waited until 2 a.m., then picked the lock and slipped inside. Tommy was passed out drunk on the couch, beer cans scattered around him. Khalil zip-tied his hands and ankles, then placed a single piece of paper on his chest. Leave town. This is your only warning. When Tommy woke the next morning, screaming and thrashing, Khalil was already gone. The second crew member, a hothead named Rico, was tougher. He didn't drink as much, stayed alert, but everyone has a weakness. Rico's was his girlfriend. Khalil didn't hurt her, didn't even approach her. He simply left a message on her car windshield. Your boyfriend is dangerous. If you value your life, leave him. The next day, she was gone. And Rico, furious and distracted, made a mistake. He went to confront Khalil alone. It was over in seconds. Khalil ambushed him in an alley, slammed him against a brick wall, and pressed the Glock to his temple. Walk away, Khalil said, his voice cold and flat. Or die, your choice. Rico chose to walk. By the third night, Dominic knew something was wrong. His crew was disappearing, his cars were sabotaged, and every time he looked over his shoulder, he swore he saw a shadow moving in the dark. Fear began to creep in, the kind of fear Dominic had spent years inflicting on others. Now it was his turn. Dominic sat alone in the warehouse, a gun on the table in front of him. His hands shook as he poured himself a drink, whiskey sloshing over the rim of the glass. Come out, he shouted into the darkness. I know you're there. Silence. Then, from the shadows, a voice. Calm, measured. You should have left when you had the chance. Khalil stepped into the light, his movements deliberate and controlled. He wasn't armed, at least, not visibly, but Dominic could feel the danger radiating from him like heat from a fire. Dominic's eyes widened. You're supposed to be dead? Khalil finished. You should have made sure. Dominic grabbed the gun, his hands fumbling as he tried to aim, but Khalil was faster. He closed the distance in 3 strides, disarming Dominic with a brutal efficiency that left no room for resistance. The gun clattered to the floor, and Khalil drove Dominic to his knees with a single, calculated strike. You made a mistake, Khalil said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. You thought I was weak, thought I'd just take it. Dominic's breath came in ragged gasps, blood trickling from his nose. Please, I didn't know. You never do, Khalil interrupted. Men like you never think about consequences. You take what you want, hurt who you want, and assume there's no one strong enough to stop you. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. But there's always someone stronger. Dominic's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of pure, primal fear. You're going to leave, Khalil said. You're going to take what's left of your crew and disappear. If I ever see you again, if I even hear your name in this neighborhood. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Dominic nodded frantically, his voice breaking. Okay. I'm gone. I swear. Khalil stood, looking down at the broken man before him. For a moment, he felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just the cold, empty certainty that violence had solved the problem. It always did. He turned and walked toward the door, his shadow stretching long across the warehouse floor. Behind him, Dominic collapsed, sobbing. The next morning, Khalil reopened the shop. The neighborhood was quieter now, safer. No one asked what happened to the Fairview crew. They just knew they were gone. Mrs. Chen brought her Honda by later that week, and Khalil fixed it with the same quiet efficiency he always had. Thank you, she said softly. Khalil just nodded. Life returned to normal. Khalil went back to fixing cars, helping neighbors, living quietly. But every now and then, late at night when the shop was closed and the streets were empty, he'd sit in the darkness and stare at the duffel bag in the steel cabinet. The shadow was never truly gone. It was just waiting,